A world where many mazes spread across the lands await adventurers to be explored and defeated. A legend is passed down among the adventurers of this world once every few decades. In any of these infinite mazes, a black hole to another world opens, and those who enter the black hole and survive are said to be awarded with immense wealth and superhuman strength. In the Backlad maze on the 38th floor, the boss room, a large monster was laying dead on the floor next to two men. One of the men who made the finishing blow had short black hair, no emotion, and seemed to only have one eye. This man, Adventurer Lekin, the one-eyed wolf, put his sword away in his sheath and raised a fist to his chest in respect for the monster that he had just killed. The other man, Adventurer Bod, the man-eating bear, chuckled about how fast Lekin killed the monster, saying that it was expected of him. Lekin said that Bod's coordination was perfect and gave him an opening for the rest to be easy, which caused the taller man to laugh and promised that he would continue doing such things for the dark-haired man. Lekin used his life sensor skill to see if there was any sense of life still left in the monster in front of them, and it was confirmed that there was, in fact, no sign. He was silent for a moment before telling Bod that there was no abnormality in the area. However, Bod was not focused on the monster anymore, as he was fully turned around and staring at something. Bod didn't believe that there were no abnormalities like Lekin said, and asked the dark-haired man about what Bod was staring at in front of him. The two men stood next to each other and stared at the ominous and infamous black hole that they had heard so much about. Lekin said that even with his powers, he could not see anything beyond the hole, and Bod asked him what he would do, since no one has ever documented what happens if a person would enter these black holes. The dark-haired male said that he would enter first, giving no hesitation, as his friend laughed and followed closely behind. However, when they entered, the two men soon learned that there was no ground for them to stand on, which meant that they were falling through darkness. Their bodies continued to be consumed by the void of the black hole as it disappeared from the maze they were originally in, and the two fell unconscious soon after. Lekin was laying on the grass of a forest, slowly opening his eyes before he sat up with a groan. He wondered how long he had been asleep for, since he would usually wake up at the slightest noise. Lekin called out to see if his friend was alright, but silence only followed. The black hole that they passed through was also nowhere to be found, and it seemed as though Lekin was in a forest with vegetation he had never seen before. The world beyond the black hole. He used his life sensor skill once again, but it confused him since the response of life was too weak, meaning that there seemed to be no humans in the area that he could sense. With life sensor, normal animals were green, while humans were red dots that Lekin could feel. However, there were no red dots in sight, which meant that Bod must have flown to a different place. Maybe even a different world. However, Lekin's perception was starting to increase a bit, to a range of 1,000 feet, which alarmed the dark-haired man. It was a blue dot, and he needed to ensure his own safety first before worrying about where Bod was. Especially since blue was not a life force from a normal being. It was from a magical beast. Lekin pulled out his sword from his storage, an ability that seemed to still be effective in this new world, and still held the same items that Lekin previously had. He held the blade in front of him and stood in place, waiting for the beast to head toward him, as Lekin wondered if the monster had sensed him and perceived him as prey. Out came a boar-like monster that burst from the trees, and Lekin charged forward and gave a single slash toward the monster's side, which caused it to slam into a tree and fall to the ground dead. He raised a fist to his chest once more to respect its death, noticing it was a beast of a species he had never seen before. Despite the unfamiliarity, Lekin believed that he should still be able to absorb its magical power, and he did as so, and succeeded within seconds with almost no remains. Unlike normal beasts, magical beasts had magic stones in their bodies, with the stone being in symmetry of the beast's heart. If Lekin used his magical power absorption, he could steal that magic and use it as he wished, just like how he could in his previous world. He could do it. Lekin could fight even in this world. He didn't know what he was going to acquire in this new world, but he would test out how far he could go with his powers, and started to walk off in a direction with the next priority being food and water. However, his plans would be interrupted by the sound of a girl screaming, which alarmed and confused him. There were no humans within the range of his life sensor skill, causing him to believe that it was likely a scream emitted with magic, until he used the skill again and saw two red dots that indicated humans. He started to make a run for it toward the direction of these humans in order to get information on this world. Meanwhile, two of the same boar-like monsters that Lekin fought were charging at a carriage with a knight trying to guard it. Lekin sprinted as fast as he could through the forest, jumping up and around each and every tree. He noticed that the movements of the lives he had sensed had stopped, and that one of the demons got shaken off during the chase. But there was still another one following the humans. The dark-haired adventurer finally came near the area and found the carriage tied to horses, assuming that there were likely people inside of this carriage. One of the boars had charged at the knight on the horse, which confused Lekin because this human was not one that Lekin had sensed. All living things had magical powers that should be detected with the life sensor skill without fail. He knew that there were certainly two different traces of human magical powers inside the carriage, and even felt magical power within the horses. But this knight didn't feel like anything to Lekin. Were there skills in this world to avoid the life sensor? Lekin started to realize that it was more than just that man, and that there were 4 men in total who didn't have magic powers whatsoever, making the dark-haired man wonder if these men were imposters who looked human. The beast struck its head against the horse, which caused it to fall over and the knight on it to tumble to the ground, and now be more vulnerable to the monster. He thought that it was the end for him, until a swirl of fire turned into a ball that was blown from the carriage and sent to strike down the beast. It did not kill it, but the woman who summoned it stood proudly in the carriage while holding a short staff. Lekin was surprised to see fire magic being used, until the beast recovered from the blast and looked toward the long-haired woman, immediately charging at the carriage. The woman was alarmed, and the knights were trying to scramble to protect her, but they were not fast enough. However, Lekin was. Lekin ran out from his hiding spot and stood in front of the carriage, pulling out his sword and slicing at the legs of the beast, which veered it off its path and caused it to fall beside the carriage. The knights tried to speak to Lekin, but he could not understand them, especially since he was focused on the monster that slowly got back on its legs. It would have been dangerous if it had collided with the carriage with the force it had, but it seemed as though it was still able to fight with full power despite only having 3 legs left. Lekin started to figure out that it was because of the fur, fat, and skin between its neck and back that helps the creature be able to firmly protect itself. If only he was able to cut its head off in one strike. His only option was to cut up from the throat. Rushing forward, Lekin sliced through its neck and brought the beast down within seconds, which surprised everyone in the area from the man's skill and power. He bowed in respect for the beast as he did with all the others and put his sword away, knowing that he had completely used up his magic powers. Lekin dug through the wound of the boar and believed that possessing it would be convenient for a later time. One of the guards walked up to Lekin and tried to talk to him, but it was apparent that the language of the people of this world was completely different, despite how they still looked human. He used his magic sensor on its highest effectiveness and found the littlest magic response from the guard in front of him, causing Lekin to confirm that he was indeed human. The humans of this new world that Lekin stood in must commonly have a microscopic amount of magic, while others had more magic, such as the people in the carriage. 2 women walked out of the carriage and one of them bowed in respect for Lekin, and started talking to him once again in this language he didn't understand. Lekin knew that this girl was the other owner of the magic that he had sensed, and realized that she was likely a person of high status. The dark-haired man finally spoke in the language that he did know, and explained that he couldn't understand her and how the girl likely wouldn't understand him either. He was silent for a moment, and put his sword down in order to properly bow toward the small girl to return the respect she gave, to which this action surprised her greatly. Bowing back was the etiquette for the royal palace in his former world, but he wondered if it was conveyed properly in this new world. The 2 women started talking with one another, seemingly speaking about Lekin, and after enough arguing, the taller woman sighed and agreed to whatever the short girl talked about. The short girl walked up to Lekin and grabbed his hand gently, gesturing toward a building in the distance and trying to communicate that she wanted him to come with her to her residence. Lekin nodded and accepted the invitation, both because these people were friendly and because he needed contact with the local people. He walked away for a moment and started to put his items away in a normal storage instead of his storage ability, to try and hide the skills he had to prevent presenting anything unnatural in this new world. With all these actions, he should look like a normal traveler to people. Lekin walked back and saw that the short girl was a user of healing magic and was using it on the other guards who were trying to protect the carriage from the beasts. He thought that the other girl was ranked higher, but the scale of the shorter girl's magic was considerably larger. They tried to lead Lekin into the carriage, which he was almost hesitant to the idea of, but he complied and was promptly driven to the Zydmore Dominion feudal lord residence. Lekin calmly sat on stone bricks, as he was brought some refreshments from a maid, while 2 men were discussing about him inside the building that he was near. The Zydmore family patriarch, Zanjikal, looked out the window at Lekin and asked Ezek, one of the knights that was with the 2 women, what he thought about the man outside. Ezek was quick to respond that Lekin had possessed military strength to a dangerous degree, yet appeared to be a man who returned manners when thanked. Zanjikal was impressed to hear the knight speak so highly of the dark-haired foreign stranger, but he was not too alarmed by his presence since Lekin had saved Zanjikal's daughter. The family patriarch told Isekai'd that he was going to give the hut in the garden to the visitor, while Isekai'd could decide what to do next. And then, a year passed. Birds flew through the sky of a forest, as Lekin could be seen sprinting through it, keeping a hold on his sword at his side. He sensed two magical beasts and leaped over a tree towards where they were located. They immediately noticed the dark-haired adventurer and started to growl and prepare themselves for battle. However, they had no chance of winning since Lekin immediately sliced through the large monsters within seconds, and quickly once again bowed in respect for their deaths. Lekin came back from his task and walked back to the residence, entering through the wooden door only to be greeted a good morning by Isekai'd. The knight told the man how impressed he was from how fast he was with hunting, being greeted back by Lekin until the dark-haired man knew that Isekai'd wanted to spar with him again that day. Lekin tossed Isekai'd his sword, and the two walked over to the front of the hut that Lekin stayed at, in order to prepare themselves for the small battle. Both men held their swords, one relaxed while the other held his blade high. Isekai'd charged forward first, and the two clashed swords, seemingly equal in power for that moment. Lekin had been staying at the Isekai'd estate for a year now, and was able to learn most of the local language, which was his biggest problem. At first, he was seen with suspicious eyes, but thanks to the respect from the feudal lord's daughter, Lady Luvianafell, and the knight, Sir Isekai'd, he had completely fit in as a member of the feudal household. Lekin and Isekai'd continued to spar until the dark-haired man had won the battle, and held his blade against the knight's neck, causing him to yield. Isekai'd sighed from the fact that he was still no match for Lekin, until their conversation was interrupted by more people starting to walk into view, and realizing how there was sparring happening, causing everyone to want to have a turn against Lekin. Recently, the front of Lekin's hut was starting to become more and more like a training ground. None of the men were able to do much of anything against Lekin due to his amount of skill, and continued to lose against the man until an old woman walked toward him to get his attention, before he could do any more sparring. She was there to let him know that Lady Luvianafell called for him and needed to come after breakfast, being told to not come with his current sweaty appearance if possible. The dark-haired man was silent for a moment before agreeing and went to change into some fancy clothes, something that he seemed to still not be used to after a whole year. The short girl had greeted Lekin and Lekin greeted her back, bowing and calling her by Luvi instead of her full first name. This was because the girl herself had told him to call her by this nickname instead of any more proper name, and he was to do this by any means, even against what was enforced by Gria, the old woman, or Luvi's servant, Marinka. Luvi made the request that she wanted Lekin to protect her on her way to a certain cliff, to which Lekin agreed to, as long as Isekai'd would instruct him to accompany her. She insisted that she had already received permission from her father, and was just about to tell Isekai'd, before changing the subject and asking Lekin to wear his own clothes rather than the fancy ones he was normally told to wear. He thought it was amusing how he was getting changed a lot since morning that day, and changed into a vest from the thread of various rock spiders, which possessed splendid defensive magic, as well as pants mixed with rare resources, a cloak made from the hide of the Bear King for more defensive magic, and a jewel sewn onto the collar for additional self-restoration. Lekin felt at ease with the equipment he was accustomed to using, and Isekai'd was quick to call for him and asked for the man to leave immediately to guard the young lady's carriage. The knight saw the appearance of Isekai'd and was about to make a comment on it, before dismissing his thoughts and walking off to the carriage with a sigh. No matter how Lekin looked to people, he certainly did not look like a noble's guard. They reached the forest mountains, and Lekin stayed close to the side of the carriage as his job was to mainly protect the patriarch of the family and protect the young lady when either of them go out. It was an easy job for him since they seemed to only go into the forest and the outskirts rather than the town. Except it was all a little too easy. The Isekai'd household was too comfortable to accept a strange foreigner like him, but he didn't come to this world for a peaceful lifestyle. He had come here to see things he had never seen before, to fight strong enemies he had never fought before, and to receive wealth and strength. It seemed that this world also had mazes that he was familiar with from his previous world, which gave him the interest to want to try and explore them in the future. However, his thoughts were interrupted by the response of a magical beast in the vicinity, which caused Lekin to walk up to Isekai'd and give the signal that he would deal with it before it came closer. Lekin sprinted off toward the direction of the beast and found it climbing down one of the trees, a spider monkey, which immediately lunged forward. He dodged the attack, and the beast decided to try and prepare a breath attack, but Lekin was faster to react when he heard the threatening sound, and charged toward it to slice at its throat before it could release it. It was stunned for a moment before the finishing blow was dealt to the spider monkey, and it was decapitated before it could react, and the corpse fell to the ground. The magic stone was quickly dug out of the dead monster, as Lekin was now familiar with how this world also valued magic stones. Other than their use for huge rituals and magic, it was also the raw ingredient for magic potions, and also an ingredient for a thing called a magic tool. Lekin walked back and tossed the stone to Ezek, who grinned and nodded as they continued their trek to their destination. They finally arrived and Luvi was told to come out, to which she quickly complied and stepped out, starting to run happily, which alarmed the knight for a moment. However, there was nothing to worry about, as all she seemed to want to do was stand at the edge of the cliff and look at the beautiful view, staring off into the distance. The young lady was in a better mood than usual, but Lekin, for just a second, almost thought that he saw a look of sadness cross Luvi's face. Marinko was fixing up Luvi's hair before finishing up the appearance by putting a necklace on the young girl, which the taller woman complimented her beauty for. Night arrived and it was time for a celebration. Her father had gotten everyone's attention and told them that that day was the day that Luvi would turn 14 and become an adult. They all cheered for this day and brought their drinks into the air before continuing the party. Knights could be seen at all of the tables spread across the large room of the residence, and Lekin was stood next to one of them, staring at the large cooked chicken. One of the butlers noticed and asked the dark-haired man if he wanted the food separated, to which he confirmed and it was done promptly as told. The butler gave Lekin the new plate of food as Lekin apologized for the trouble and ate his food, remembering how it was delicious due to being covered in plentiful spices to give it balance. Lekin was stuck in his thoughts and remembered how he believed that Luvi was just a simple-minded child, but it seemed that in this world, 14-year-olds were treated as full adults, which meant that marriage was permitted. Ezek walked up to Lekin and started up a chat that seemed normal at first, even asking about if Lekin wanted to try some wine, until the knight suddenly went silent for a moment and asked if he could talk with the dark-haired man. They walked over to the corner to talk more privately, as Ezek explained to Lekin that he should avoid going near the library for a while, confusing him, until Ezek explained that there were going to be messengers from other households who would be visiting one after another to congratulate Luvi for turning 14. It was known that none of the people from these noble families were as understanding as Luvi's family, and would cause needless trouble if they found a person with an unclear identity at the young lady's side. A daughter of nobility is burdened with the role of linking blood relationships, and everyone would be desperate to be seen as a good candidate by Luvi, even just a little. Ezek apologized for the request, and that was the end of his chat. The next day, Lekin was back to hunting more frequently, since he had less time constraints due to protecting people of the residence so much. He had been hunting for valuable prey near the mansion, and decided to try and go deeper in the mountains to try and find a formidable magical beast, and his wishes would come true. An extremely large blue dot could be sensed by Lekin, which was surprising about how exceptionally strong the response was. It was only Lekin's third day since he started going out, so he believed that he was lucky to be able to encounter one so quickly. Lekin quickly took out his sword and hid behind a slope to wait and close in when it would come close. After a few minutes, the dot had gotten larger, and out came a large creature that seemed to be a cross from a turtle and a porcupine. The creature was eating one of the boar-like monsters that Lekin fought before. This was the first time that Lekin had seen this magical beast, and it stood at 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide with a fairly hefty build. It had 3 eyes and 6 legs that were fairly short. Lekin hummed and thought about what to do next, and knew that he didn't know the weakness of the monster or how to attack it, which would prove to cause trouble, wondering if he should challenge this beast before it realized his presence. But if Lekin were to do that, he would try to slice at the monster and have no effect on it before immediately getting killed by it. It was simply not going to work, and it would be reckless, causing the dark-haired adventurer to believe that it would be best to withdraw. However, Lekin would step on a branch and make a small bit of noise. The monster perked up its head and the quills on its back started to stand straight up, signaling an attack. Lekin flew into the air with a wind spell and dodged each and every attack of the quills being sent toward him. His wind skill was not one for flying, and it seemed that he would not be able to get any more distance even if he were to use up all of his magic. Suddenly, the rush of quills stopped for a moment, confusing Lekin until he realized that the monster was preparing a breath attack. He dodged that one as well, just barely, but dodging it meant that he was sent to the ground. The air was cold due to the attack, and Lekin knew that if he took the blow with his current equipment, he would be screwed, and so he made a run for it into the forest. Since the beast was a slow-moving opponent, Lekin entered the forest with the hopes of shaking off the monster and managed to already run for 100 feet, hiding behind a tree to catch his breath until the beast came barreling through the trees while curled up in a ball. The monster was slowly catching up with Lekin, and he knew that he needed a plan to get away from it, before noticing a cliff in the distance. He proceeded to fly up the side of it as the monster followed behind. Lekin got up and hid behind a tree before the beast could notice where he went, and it looked around in confusion, before slowly walking away. He was astonished by how strong that magical beast was and pulled out some magic stones to replenish his magic, before remembering that he had medicine provided by the Isekai'd household that he hadn't tried yet. However, when he drank it, he spat it out almost immediately, because it had tasted pretty much inedible to him. Despite drinking it, it gave no sign of complete regeneration, and decided not to drink the rest if it was not going to heal him quickly. Lekin attempted to use medicine from his former world, but it proved to be weak as well, and wouldn't replenish his magic, meaning that he would need to get a replacement from somewhere else. If Lekin were to meet that magical beast again, he most likely would not be left unscathed. He made his way back to the Isekai'd household and noticed the carriage of an aristocrat, assuming that a guest must be staying over, and came while he was out hunting. However, Lekin couldn't help but take a great notice in how terribly luxurious their carriage was. A few days later, in the night, Lekin sensed something wrong and jumped awake, wondering what was happening. There was a magical being on site, and it was heading straight for the main building where Luvi and Marinka were. Grabbing his sword and armor, Lekin knew that it was an invader, and quickly made his way toward its direction in order to protect the people of the household. He sprinted toward the main building of the residence, as a woman was seen trying to climb up the side of the building with ease and jumping over the roof. Lekin knew that this woman was a skillful assassin, before realizing that the woman was going to the direction of Luvi's bedroom. He knew he wouldn't make it in time if he used the stairs, and promptly used his wind skill to fly up onto the roof, while the assassin would use a rope to dangle from the roof and stand outside of the window of Luvi's bedroom. Luvi was in a deep sleep, and the woman stuck a dagger into the window to try and pry it open. But Lekin was faster, and jumped down to decapitate this assassin before she could react. As the dead assassin fell to the ground, Lekin grabbed the rope and looked through the window at the sleeping girl, sighing in relief that she was still safe. Luvi's father and Isekai'd had dark expressions when they looked down at the dead body of the assassin, as the family patriarch was disappointed in himself for being so naive about only having a night watch stand in front of his daughter's room, instead of anywhere else. Isekai'd said that it had been decided that Luvi was to marry into the Shadresta family, a noble family that was connected to the royal family. He expected interference since Luvi was of rural nobility and would become the queen of their next patriarch, but he didn't think that there would be assassins sent to kill her. Isekai'd wondered if it would have been possible to capture the woman without killing her, but Isekai'd had Lekin's back and explained that the assassin would have likely chosen death if captured, and would have refused to confess anything. Plus, even if they knew about the mastermind, there would be nothing they could do now, and it would be better to just not know. Luvi's father wondered how Lekin was able to dash up a wall and kill the assassin so swiftly, but Lekin kept quiet about his powers, which Isekai'd decided to not pester the dark-haired man about. He thanked Lekin for his efforts and wished for him to continue protecting his daughter, to which Lekin bowed and agreed to do. Another night, another assassin to try and kill Luvi. He jumped over the brick wall and held up his crossbow, until Lekin leapt up and sliced through his head. This was the fourth assassin who had tried to come and kill Luvi, which almost exhausted Lekin just from the thought, as it was apparent that the enemy was quite persistent. Until Luvi's wedding had ended safely, he was not going to be able to move away from there. The next day, Lekin was having a chat with the young girl about his hometown and everything about him, calling the man by La Envy. La Envy was the name that rare people were called when they have come from another world, and it was said that these people possessed outstanding power. In other words, it was no more than just a legend, but Luvi believes that Lekin was truly one of those people. The old woman tries to get Luvi's attention and told her that it was about time for her other appointments, disappointing the girl from the thought. Lekin was about to make his leave until the young girl told him to wait, and asked for him to show her the red jewel on his chest, which shocked him greatly, as he tried to make sure that no one could see the jewel. Marinka held out a plate where Lekin placed the jewel on, and Luvi admired it, before the girl would take off her own necklace and telling the taller woman to give it to Lekin. The old maid was alarmed by this action and tried to warn Luvi to not do so, but the young girl insisted. Lekin felt himself start to sweat in a panic from the exchange that was happening, knowing that the red jewel was extremely important to him. However, he couldn't reject the exchange or else Luvi would receive shame, even if she didn't know that the jewel was proof of the life that Lekin had lived. Putting a hand to his chest, his body seemed to move on its own as he bowed and accepted the exchange, surprising himself, while the young girl smiled warmly. Lekin walked away and left the room, walking down the hall as he thought to himself about why he had ended up consenting to giving the girl his jewel. He decided to dismiss his thoughts and feelings, as he was going to leave the estate soon enough and be able to slip out just before the preparations for the wedding. Luvi might become sad, but with time, she would probably forget about the stray wolf. However, Lekin would soon learn that there was no opportunity for him. Luvi would soon finish her preparations and had the number of people on night watch increase, before the day would come 2 days later, where Lady Luvianafell went with her in-laws in a faraway town to get married.